On April 30th, 1945, in a bunker beneath the ruins of Berlin, Eva Braun became Eva Hitler for approximately 40 hours before dying by suicide alongside her new husband, Adolf Hitler. She was 33 years old, and her decision to remain with Hitler until the end, and to die with him, made her one of history's most controversial figures. But Eva Braun did not make her fateful choices in isolation. She came from a respectable middle-class Bavarian family, parents who had raised her with traditional values, two sisters who had their own lives and families, and extended relatives who knew her as simply Eva, not as the mistress of the Führer. When the war ended and the full horror of Nazi crimes became public knowledge, Eva Braun's family faced an impossible situation. They were connected by blood to the woman who had been Hitler's companion, the woman who had chosen to die with the man responsible for tens of millions of deaths and unimaginable atrocities. How did Eva Braun's family survive the aftermath of the war? How did they deal with their connection to one of history's most infamous relationships? Did they defend Eva's memory or disavow her? Were they persecuted for their connection to Hitler, or did they manage to rebuild their lives in post-war Germany? This is the story of what happened to Eva Braun's family after World War II. A story of survival, denial, silence, and the impossible burden of being related to someone connected to the greatest evil of the 20th century. To understand what happened to Eva's family after the war, we must first understand who they were and what their lives were like before and during the war. Eva Anna Paula Braun was born on February 6, 1912, in Munich, Germany. She was the second of three daughters born to Friedrich Fritz Braun and Franziska Fanny Kronberger. The Braun family was solidly middle-class, Catholic, and conventional in their values and lifestyle. Fritz Braun worked as a teacher and later as a school administrator, providing a comfortable, if not wealthy, life for his family. Eva had two sisters, Ilse, born in 1909, 3 years older than Eva, and Margaret, called Gretel, born in 1915, 3 years younger. The three Braun sisters grew up in Munich during the turbulent years after World War I and during the rise of the Nazi Party. They attended Catholic schools, participated in sports and social activities, and lived what appeared to be normal lives for young women of their class and time. Eva's fateful connection to Adolf Hitler began in 1929, when she was 17 years old and working as an assistant and model for Heinrich Hoffmann, Hitler's official photographer. Hitler, who was 40 years old at the time, began paying attention to the young Eva. Their relationship developed slowly and secretly over the next few years. Eva became Hitler's mistress, though this relationship was hidden from the German public, as Hitler cultivated an image of being married to Germany and devoted solely to his political mission. Eva's family knew about her relationship with Hitler, though the extent of their knowledge and their feelings about it varied among family members. Fritz Braun, Eva's father, was reportedly uncomfortable with the relationship and with his daughter's involvement with Hitler. He was not a Nazi enthusiast and apparently had reservations about Hitler's politics. However, like many Germans, he was not in a position to openly oppose Hitler, and his daughter's relationship with the Führer put the entire family in a delicate position. Franziska Braun, Eva's mother, apparently accepted the relationship more readily, possibly seeing it as advantageous for the family. The material benefits that came with Eva's position as Hitler's companion were significant. Eva received a generous allowance, lived in comfort in Munich, and at Hitler's Berghof retreat in the Bavarian Alps, and could provide financial help to her family when needed. Ilse Braun, the oldest sister, married a doctor and lived a relatively quiet life. She was aware of Eva's relationship with Hitler, but maintained some distance from it, focusing on her own family and medical career. Gretel Braun, the youngest sister, was more directly involved in Eva's life. She frequently visited Eva at the Berghof, socialized with Hitler's inner circle, and in 1944 married Hermann Fegelein, an SS officer who served as Heinrich Himmler's liaison to Hitler's headquarters. When the war ended in May 1945, the Braun family's situation was immediately precarious. Eva had died with Hitler in the bunker, and news of their marriage and joint suicide quickly became public. This made Eva Braun a household name worldwide, no longer Hitler's secret companion but his wife, the woman who had chosen to die with him. The Braun family was suddenly connected in the public mind to Adolf Hitler, in a way they had not been during the war years, when Eva's relationship with Hitler had been kept relatively private. The Allied occupation authorities immediately took an interest in the Braun family. American intelligence services, which controlled the area of Bavaria where the Brauns lived, wanted to question family members about Hitler, about Eva's relationship with him, about life at the Berghof, and about any information they might have regarding other Nazi leaders or about hidden assets. Fritz and Franziska Braun, along with Ilse and Gretel, were all interrogated multiple times in the months following the war's end. These interrogations were extensive and sometimes harsh. The Allies were trying to piece together the final days of Hitler's regime, to understand the personalities and relationships within Hitler's inner circle, and to locate any war criminals who might be in hiding. The Braun family, as the closest surviving relatives of Hitler's companion and wife, were seen as potentially valuable sources of information. Fritz Braun, Eva's father, was questioned about his knowledge of Hitler's plans, about conversations he might have had with Hitler, and about his own political views. Fritz insisted that he had never been close to Hitler, that his relationship with his daughter had been strained because of her involvement with the Führer, and that he had no significant information about Nazi activities or plans. Interrogators noted that Fritz appeared genuinely disturbed by what had happened and by his family's connection to Hitler. Franziska Braun was also extensively questioned. She had spent more time at the Berghof with Eva than Fritz had, and interrogators believed she might have witnessed or overheard conversations of intelligence value. Franziska maintained that she had been simply a mother visiting her daughter, that she had no interest in politics, and that Hitler had never discussed serious matters in her presence. She described Hitler as polite and courteous to her, but distant and focused on his work. Gretel Braun, the youngest sister, faced the most intensive interrogation because of her marriage to Hermann Fegelein. Fegelein had been executed by Hitler in the final days of the war for attempting to desert Berlin, but his position as Himmler's liaison meant he had potentially been privy to significant information. Gretel was questioned about what Fegelein might have told her, about documents or valuables he might have hidden, and about her own knowledge of SS activities. Gretel's situation was particularly difficult because she was pregnant at the time of Fegelein's execution. She gave birth to a daughter in early May 1945, just days after the war ended. This baby girl, named Eva after her aunt, was Hermann Fegelein's only child. Gretel now faced the challenge of raising a baby alone while being interrogated by Allied authorities and dealing with the stigma of being both Eva Braun's sister and an SS officer's widow. The immediate post-war period was chaotic and dangerous for Germans with connections to the Nazi leadership. While the Braun family members were not accused of crimes themselves, their association with Hitler and with other Nazi leaders made them targets of suspicion and hostility. They faced denazification proceedings, which were tribunals designed to classify Germans according to their level of involvement with and support for the Nazi regime. Fritz Braun, because of his position as a teacher and school administrator, had been required to join Nazi-affiliated organizations. Though there is no evidence he was an enthusiastic Nazi. In denazification proceedings, he was classified as a nominal Nazi, someone who had joined party organizations for professional reasons rather than ideological commitment. This classification meant he faced restrictions on employment and required him to undergo a process of political re-education, but he was not subject to severe punishment. Franziska Braun was not classified as needing denazification, as she had never held any official position or party membership. However, her status as Eva Braun's mother meant she faced social stigma and was subjected to ongoing scrutiny by occupation authorities, who worried that she might be in contact with fugitive Nazis or might possess hidden valuables from Hitler's circle. Ilse Braun, having maintained relative distance from Hitler and having no party affiliation beyond what was required of ordinary Germans, passed through denazification with minimal difficulty. Her husband's medical profession had required some party connections, but he was also classified as a nominal Nazi. They were able to resume their lives relatively quickly, though they faced questions and suspicion because of Ilse's relationship to Eva. Gretel Braun faced the most severe scrutiny because of her marriage to Fegelein. She was questioned repeatedly about his activities, about documents or money he might have given her, and about contacts she might have had with other SS officers. Gretel consistently denied having any information of intelligence value or any hidden assets. She presented herself as a young woman who had married an officer without understanding the full extent of his activities or the regime's crimes. The Braun family's financial situation after the war was difficult. Whatever assets or valuables Eva might have accumulated during her years with Hitler were either lost in the bombing of Munich, seized by the Allies, or never accessible to the family. Fritz Braun's pension as a teacher was meager in the chaotic post-war economy. The family faced the same food shortages, housing difficulties, and economic hardships as most Germans in the immediate post-war years. One of the most painful aspects of the post-war period for the Braun family was the revelation of the full extent of Nazi crimes. As the concentration camps were liberated, as the evidence of the Holocaust became public, and as the Nuremberg trials documented the regime's atrocities, Germans who had been ignorant of or willfully blind to these crimes were forced to confront them. For the Braun family, this confrontation was particularly pointed. Their Eva, their sister and daughter, had been intimately connected to the man responsible for all of this. The family's response to this revelation, as documented in later interviews and accounts, was complicated and evolved over time. Initially, there seems to have been denial and rationalization. They insisted that Eva had known nothing about concentration camps or mass murder, that she had been interested only in fashion, movies, and domestic life, that Hitler had kept her isolated from his political and military activities. They portrayed Eva as an innocent, even naive young woman who had been in love and who had tragically died because of that love. This narrative of Eva as innocent victim rather than willing participant in Hitler's world became the family's primary defense of her memory. In interviews in later years, Ilse and Gretel insisted that Eva had never discussed politics, had never expressed anti-Semitic views in their presence, and had been simply a young woman who happened to fall in love with a man who turned out to be a monster. They argued that Eva should be judged separately from Hitler's crimes, that her personal relationship with him did not make her complicit in his political decisions. However, this narrative was and remains controversial. Critics point out that Eva Braun spent years at Hitler's side, lived in comfort while others suffered, witnessed Hitler's actions and decisions, even if she did not participate in them, and chose to remain with him even when his crimes were becoming undeniable. Her decision to die with him was portrayed by the family as romantic devotion, but others saw it as a final statement of loyalty to a man whose regime had caused unimaginable suffering. As the immediate post-war chaos subsided and West Germany began to stabilize and rebuild in the late 1940s and early 1950s, the Braun family attempted to resume normal lives. Fritz Braun died in 1964, having lived quietly in Munich in his later years. He rarely spoke publicly about Eva or about his family's connection to Hitler. Those who knew him in his final years described him as a sad, withdrawn man who seemed burdened by his family's history. Franziska Braun lived until 1976, reaching the age of 96. Unlike her husband, Franziska was apparently more willing to discuss Eva, and she gave several interviews over the years in which she defended her daughter's memory. She insisted that Eva had been a good person, a loving daughter, and that she should not be judged by her association with Hitler. Franziska maintained that Eva had loved Hitler genuinely, and that her decision to die with him reflected that love, not political commitment to Nazism. Ilse Braun lived the most private life of the three sisters. She remained married to her husband and focused on her family and her work. She gave very few interviews and generally refused to discuss Eva or Hitler. When she did speak about her sister, it was in vague general terms, emphasizing Eva's youth and her focus on personal life rather than politics. Ilse died in 1979, having successfully maintained a low profile throughout her life. Gretel Braun's post-war life was more dramatic. In 1954, she married again, this time to a successful West German businessman. Her second marriage apparently provided financial security and some social rehabilitation. However, she remained marked by her past, and people who knew her identity as Eva Braun's sister and Fegelein's widow never quite let her forget it. She gave some interviews over the years, generally repeating the family narrative about Eva's innocence and separation from politics. Gretel died in 1987. The daughter born to Gretel and Hermann Fegelein, Eva Barbara Fegelein, faced unique challenges. She grew up in post-war Germany as the niece of Eva Braun and the daughter of an executed SS officer. Her mother apparently tried to shield her from this history when she was young, but as she grew older, Eva Barbara had to confront her family's past. She has lived a very private life, giving almost no interviews, and little is publicly known about her. She reportedly changed her name to avoid association with Fegelein and the Hitler connection. seeking anonymity that was understandably difficult to maintain. The question of what the Braun family knew about Nazi crimes and when they knew it has been debated by historians. The family insisted that they were ignorant of the Holocaust and other atrocities, that Eva never discussed such matters, and that they had no reason to suspect the extent of what was happening. Skeptics note that by the early 1940s, rumors and information about mass killings were circulating in Germany, and that someone with Eva's access to Hitler's inner circle almost certainly heard something, even if Hitler did not discuss details with her. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. It is likely that the Braun family, like many Germans, engaged in willful ignorance, not asking questions they did not want answered, not pursuing information that might have forced uncomfortable moral decisions. Eva herself may have chosen not to know, to focus on the comfortable life she enjoyed, and to avoid confronting what her lover was responsible for. This willful ignorance, while not legally culpable, carries its own moral weight. The Braun family's experience reflects broader patterns in how Germans dealt with their Nazi past. In the immediate post-war years, there was often denial, rationalization, and an emphasis on German suffering rather than on crimes committed by Germans. Many Germans portrayed themselves as victims of Hitler rather than as participants in or beneficiaries of his regime. The Braun family's insistence on Eva's innocence and their focus on her personal relationship with Hitler, rather than on the political context of that relationship, fit this pattern. However, as decades passed, and as Germany underwent a gradual reckoning with its Nazi past, some members of the Braun family showed evolution in their views. Later interviews suggest a growing acknowledgement that Eva's position at Hitler's side, regardless of her personal innocence or ignorance, connected her to his crimes in ways that could not be simply dismissed as romantic tragedy. The public's fascination with Eva Braun has ensured that her family could never completely escape their connection to her. Multiple books have been written about Eva, films and documentaries have portrayed her life, and historians continue to study her relationship with Hitler. Each new book or film brought renewed attention to the Braun family, forced them to relive their past, and sometimes prompted them to defend Eva's memory against what they saw as unfair characterizations. The family has been particularly sensitive to portrayals that depict Eva as anti-Semitic or as politically engaged with Nazism. They have insisted that surviving letters and diaries show Eva as focused on personal matters, fashion, and entertainment, rather than politics. They point out that there is no evidence Eva personally participated in any Nazi crimes, or that she held official positions in the party or its organizations. However, critics argue that this defense misses the point. Eva Braun's significance is not that she was an active participant in Nazi crimes, but that she was Hitler's companion, that she provided him with personal comfort and normalcy, that she benefited materially from her position, and that she chose to remain with him even as his regime's crimes became undeniable. Her final decision to marry Hitler and die with him, which the family portrayed as romantic devotion, can also be seen as a final endorsement of the man and what he represented. The fate of Eva Braun's personal effects and possessions after the war has been another source of controversy involving her family. Eva had accumulated considerable personal property during her years with Hitler: jewelry, furs, designer clothing, photographs, home movies, and personal letters. Much of this was destroyed in the bombing of Munich or was lost in the chaos of the war's end. Some items were seized by Allied forces and ended up in archives or were returned to Germany decades later. The family has had ongoing disputes over the years about control of Eva's letters, diaries, and photographs. These documents have significant historical and monetary value, and there have been legal battles over who owns them and who has the right to publish them or profit from them. These disputes have sometimes divided the family and have kept the Braun name in the news long after the immediate post-war period. The extended Braun family, cousins, and more distant relatives also face challenges because of their connection to Eva. Some changed their names to avoid association. Others moved away from Bavaria to areas where their family connection was unknown. The burden of the Braun name in post-war Germany varied depending on individual circumstances, but it was rarely completely absent. Today, more than 75 years after Eva Braun's death, direct descendants of her immediate family are still alive. Gretel's daughter, Eva Barbara, and her children, Eva Braun's great-nieces and great-nephews, carry the genetic heritage of the Braun family. These descendants have generally maintained extreme privacy, understandably reluctant to be publicly associated with Eva Braun, and through her with Adolf Hitler. The story of what happened to Eva Braun's family after World War II is ultimately a story about the long shadow of historical evil and about how families cope with connections to those who were part of that evil. The Braun family did not commit crimes themselves, but they were connected by blood and marriage to someone intimately associated with the greatest criminal in modern history. They faced interrogation, suspicion, social stigma, and the psychological burden of their family history. Their response, emphasizing Eva's personal innocence and romantic devotion while minimizing her connection to Hitler's political life, reflects a common human tendency to defend loved ones and to separate personal relationships from larger historical and moral contexts. Whether this defense is adequate or whether it represents a failure to fully confront uncomfortable truths is a question each observer must answer for themselves. The Braun family's experience also raises questions about collective guilt and inherited responsibility. Should family members be held accountable for the actions or associations of their relatives? Should Eva's sisters and parents have been punished or stigmatized for her choices? Most would say no, that individual guilt cannot be transferred to family members. Yet the reality is that families of notorious historical figures do carry a burden, fair or not, and must find ways to live with their heritage. In the end, Eva Braun's family survived the aftermath of World War II, rebuilt their lives as best they could, and gradually faded from public attention. They defended Eva's memory in terms they found acceptable, mourned her as their daughter and sister, and tried to live normal lives despite their extraordinary circumstances. Their story is a footnote to the larger history of Nazi Germany and its aftermath. But it is a footnote that reveals something important about how individuals and families navigate the consequences of history's greatest catastrophes.